Good day everyone. So today I'm going to discuss about the style variation and narrative by Mick Short. So style variation in narrative. This reading by Mick Short examines the use of graphological deviation as an indicator of viewpoint in Irving Welsh novel. So Marabou Stork Nightmares. So although graphological deviation is normally seen as the preserve of stylistic experimentation in poetry, Short's analysis, which is oriented principally towards the opening of the novel, demonstrates how prose fiction can draw on this level of language for stylistic effect. So Short also develops in a theoretically more rigorous ways some of the terms such as viewpoint, the focalizer, and refractor, which have been used across this strand. So Welsh work is challenging, often disturbing, and at times unsuitable, as it were, for the stylistically faint-hearted. Nevertheless, and as Short's analysis demonstrates, the writing of these novels pays many useful dividends in stylistic terms. So here is the example of the summary of Marabou Stork Nightmares. So an interpretative summary of Marabou Stork Nightmares. So Irving Welsh is probably the best known for Trainspotting, a novel about the drugs culture in Britain, which was also made into a highly successful film. If the passage above was your first experience of Marabou Stork Nightmares, you may have found it initially difficult. This is because the events of the story are presented out of chronological sequence and in an apparent piecemeal and disorganized fashion by an unconscious narrator who is in vegetative state at the outset of the novel. He is fantasizing about himself and an imaginary friend. So Sandy Jamison, who are supposedly in South Africa on an extraordinary quest to kill the Marabou stork. So to make matters even more difficult for the reader, there are three distinct levels of narration in the novel through which the narrator, Roy Strang, is continually shifting or being shifted by external intervention. So the three distinct levels of narration in the novel is the deepest level in the South African fantasy narration concerning his hunt for the Marabou stork, and the highest is one where the narrator is aware of what is going on around him in the Edinburgh hospital as he drifts towards consciousness, something which is never fully achieved but which he gets closer to as the novel proceeds. So in the middle level is a rather jumbled and sometimes contradictory account of Royster's life leading up to his attempted suicide, his resulting vegetative state, which he has been in for 2 years, and his eventual death at the end of the novel. So the top level and the middle level are in any case part of the same general fictional world. So what they call the text actual world. So the top level coinciding with what appears to be the narrator's coding time, what is happening to the first narrator in his fictional now, and the middle level being what happened to the first narrator, what the first narrator did in his fictional past, and the deepest level of narration is distinct from the other two, and that is a fantasy. So they call what they call a fantasy universe. So, but the connections and correspondences between it and the two levels of the text actual world are so many that they begin to interpenetrate and begin explanations of one another. So The movements from one level of narration to another, sometimes forced by external stimuli, and sometimes by connections made within the mind of the narrator, are clearly meant to be representative of a mind drifting towards and away from consciousness. So there are major tasks as readers. First is to work when we are in which narrative level and why, to construct a characterization and narrative structure for the text, and to make sense of the connections which become apparent among the different levels of narration. So, a stylistic commentary of the opening passage in relation to the rest of the novel. So, this narratological innovation is in turn or signaled or controlled through considerable linguistic invention, which we can now explore through a detailed examination of the novel's opening. So, the novel opens with what in the 20th century has become a fairly standard in medias res device. So, presenting what must be new information to the reader of it, as if it were given information to the draw to draw the reader into seeing events from the narrator's viewpoint and with his ideological assumptions. So when you try to look at this summary, so in the first four sentences, we are not told who the narrating I is, who Sandy Jamison is, where the characters are, or what exactly they are doing. And in spite of the repeated use of the quasi-didactic natural spoken narrative use of this and sentence, we do not know what journey they are on or why it is crazy. So which land they are in, why it is strange, and what vehicle they are in, and why that vehicle is strange. So graphological deviation and style variation. So in spite of the minor sentence syntax, the first four sentences would appear to be reasonably characterized as standard English. However, there is a switch in sentences from sentence 6 to 8 within the first orthographically normal paragraph to the presentation of a non-standard Scots dialect. So later on in the novel, when we know where the narrator comes from, we will be able to characterize this dialect as working-class Edinburgh Scots. So the orthographic indicators of a Scots dialect are Wilney for want, shite for sheet, and ow for all. This indication of a pronunciation change also corresponds with the introduction of a rude scatological vocabulary. So in addition to the audacities of the given new structures, so the first few sentences of the text are characterized by syntactic and graphological oddity. So the sentences 2 to 4 are minor sentences grammatically and are also separated from one another by line spaces and another by line spaces. So sentence 1 is grammatically complete and has the standard narrative past tense, which leads us to assume this tense as a background default for the next three minor sentences. But sentence 1 is also very deviant orthographically, full stop separating the words instead of spaces. So when Roy speaks in his fantasy narration, however, he uses a standard English, which is at the same time marked as belonging to a kind of upper class between the wars. Beagle speak, which is parodic of what might be called the English of Empire. So the only clear indicators of this style is in the passage quoted in one above, or the narrator's reference to his friend by last name only, and the word blighter in sentence 26. So its tense is consistent with that of the first four sentences, and there are no orthographic indications of Edinburgh Scots. So, but is orthographically given connected to the Edinburgh Scots narration in the unanchored given information. Use of they also coheres better with the day of sentences 6 to 7 and the cants of 8 than with sentences 1 to 4. So indeed, in the fantasy universe narration, sentences 1 to 2 appear to rule the possibility of reference to individuals other than the narrator and chamisol. So the sentence 5 thus appears to be the transition sentence, which moves the reader from one level of narration to the next. So the graphological divisions and visually symbolic effects. So the narrator's response to what he sees as interference by as yet non-specific outsiders is to try go deeper. So this phraseology is then used as the trigger for the first of a series of graphology symbolic. So representations which can be found throughout the novel and which provide textual evidence for the notion that the different narrations are best seen as levels of the same narration. So the first graphology symbolic movement between the narratorial levels of the novel sentences 9 to 19 of the passage is complex. So as a result of the fact that it contains an upward movement embedded inside a downward one, elsewhere, in more simple cases, when the narrator moves down a level, this is usually represented symbolically by the word deeper in capitals repeated on 3 successive lines. So a series of dashes of varying length occur after the final deeper, so apparently representing the size of the mental pause between the effort to go deeper and resumption of the lower. So in this case, fantasy universe narration. So it also indicates something which is true throughout novel, namely it is possible associate particularly tenses exactly with particular levels of narration, although the text actual word in the narrator's coding time fictional present is usually accorded the present tense, and the fantasy universe narration in the narration of the text actual word and the narrator's past are mainly in the past tense. So there are Janus-based sentence like 5 from time to time, and there are also some other textually strategic tense shifts within the default tense for the particular narrative level. So as I said, the narrator represents the unfolding of his fantasy universe as the deepest level of the narration. So in that of his presently experienced coding time as the highest, in the opening to the novel which I am concentrating on, there is no clear representative of the middle level. So the narrator's past in the text actual world, although interestingly the narratorially ambivalent sentence 5 could be seen as relating to this middle level as well as to the other two. So Marabou's Short Nightmares is an extraordinary novel. So it's extremely distasteful subject matter, and the attitudes of the characters portrayed will be enough to dissuade many from reading it at all. But I hope to have shown that it also has considerable artistic interest in general narratology terms. So in its linguistic detail and the interrelationships between this linguistic detail and the larger scale narratological structure. So I hope to have shown you that graphological deviation and patterning and style variation are important factors in how viewpoint shifts. So in particular, how movements among the levels of narration are controlled in the opening to Marabou's Short Nightmares. So indeed, the graphological division to signal viewpoint occurs in a number of his works and so can be seen as part of Irving's overall style. So that is all about, so that is my report all about the topic of the style variation and narrative.